Good morning. So we're continuing our review and possible conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. The Rebbe Rashab did not finish writing, and we're studying and reviewing my essay that I wrote precisely with that purpose in mind, to derive from what the Rebbe Rashab did say, plus the source material from the Maimer Hamagbihi Sheves, primarily, what most likely would have been the continuing narrative of Ayin Beis. So where are we up to? We've middle of understanding what is Ner Mitzvah, what a mitzvah comes to add to Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. So there's the Neshama, which is a divine entity, a flame of God, Ner Hashem, and it consists of, like we discussed, there's the wick, which is the divine soul as it's immersed and into the body and the animal soul. There's the oil, which is the intelligence of the human intelligence of the animal soul. And there's the flame that it creates, the fuel being absorbed and being drawn and guided by the wick to create the flame, the fiery flame, the passion of Ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, loving of God, even also with the animal soul, followed by the contemplation of Shema Yisrael. What does a mitzvah come to add? As we've been learning, the mitzvah, specifically now we're understanding why we put on talis and tefillin before davening. The mitzvah is Makif and has a zgula miyuchedes, as a unique feature, allowing to help to refine and elevate the animal soul, in addition to what the neshama can do on its own. And specifically the mitzvah of talis and tefillin, which is a Makif that's drawn into the pnimi. As he explained, the talis, we wrap around the talis, as well as the tefillin, especially the tefillin sheberosh, which has the Shema v'hoya and Shemaya within it, as we learned yesterday. This is from the Maimer of the Mitteler Rebbe, based on the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, where the Rebbe Rashab never really got to. He hints to it in a number of places. He talks about mitzvah, but never in the context of how a mitzvah adds to the Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, of the isbonenus of the yichud of Hashem Echad, of Shema. But here we did learn that, and that was point number 4 in the Mitteler Rebbe's Maimer, which is page 11 of this summary, which can be found if you want to follow the text on the WhatsApp group, Ayin Beis group, where we finished number 4. And we're going to go now into point number 5, where he talks about goes into more detail about the effect of the Makif of mitzvahs. Now, before I continue, just for the record, I did not cite everything the Mitteler Rebbe writes. I did most of it, and mainly highlights, but there are definitely more details. And one of the details I just noticed yesterday when I was reviewing it again, as I had mentioned, and I want to correct myself, I mentioned yesterday that the Chazal tell us that ha-keda krishma b'leit film, if a person says krishma without film, it's like he's made eidah sheker. I mentioned yesterday it's like a korban without nesachim. It's not correct. It's like, say, someone that's bearing false witness. And the Mitteler Rebbe brings it in this section. I just didn't quote it in my summary, because in the summary I just try to keep things as concise as possible. But I just want to make mention of it because he proves from that the point that we discussed yesterday, which is that one of the effects that a mitzvah adds to the hisbonenus of the neshama in Shema is that it gives it permanence. It gives it kiyum nitzchi, that even after davening, it doesn't have averes v'chelefes, it doesn't just pass like a temporary experience, which is what? The love of God, but the mitzvahs give it a permanence. They make them, it's established. So the Chazal is a perfect proof to it. Because what do we say? Emes v'yasev v'nochem, it's ma'ames, the truth, that this love of God, the unity of the divine, which permeates all of existence and all of us, including the animal soul, and the bittul that it affects and the love that it affects for Havas Hashem is not just a temporary thing. It's true reality all the time. So someone who says Shema without tefillin, shabarosh, is like eidah sheker. Like he said, it's like Adrigi said, like it's that he said that when it's emes, it's tochen la'ad, it stands forever. The adargia loshen sheker, something that's false, is not going to last. So that's why it's like bearing false witness, because you're saying Hashem Echad, you're contemplating on it, but you don't have the permanence of it. So that's why the Chazal compare it as a person puts on it says Shema without putting on tefillin. So it does add a whole dimension to it. And as I said, I didn't quote everything because I relied that people can look it up themselves in the Mitteler Rebbe's Maimer, but I just thought it would be helpful to just mention that. Okay, and with that, we move now to point number 5. What else can I say about that? The Makif is brought into Pnimius, Keyach ve'ez. So even though the Neshama can do a certain extent, but it's the Talis and Tefillin and the mitzvahs that add to the point of permanence and really give the power to really draw down the highest levels of Kedusha Elyena, as we learned also that mitzvah is Kedusha Atzmis, not just the Kedusha of Chachma, of Atzilus, but even higher than that. So with that, we're at the bottom of page 11, and the next point is Beis Dvarim B'Keyach HaMakif the Mitzvos. Mitteler Rebbe now is going to break down that the Makif of Mitzvos have they accomplish two things. One is the number 5, and the second will be in point number 6. What's number 5? It says, Hamshech Ayin Ad Lamata Mata L'Hoyer Cheshach HaNefesh HaBamis. It draws down the oir all the way down below to illuminate the darkness of the animal soul. So he's going to go into more depth of how to affect the animal soul, how much mitzvahs can help, in addition to whatever the neshama can educate and inspire the animal soul, that it brings it down lamata mata. So obviously he's building upon the point we've already learned, but he's going to elaborate more. So here we are. That's point number 1. In number 6, we're going to have point number 2, which is elevating the animal soul, the divine soul, to its root. So remember that the mitzvahs we talked about have two effects. One is on the effect on the animal soul, and also the effect on the divine soul. But now we're going to talk about the animal soul. So here we go. V'hinei muvim mizeh. This is the Rebbe, Mitteler Rebbe writing. Now it's understood from above, from what we've learned about mitzvahs, sheyesh b'koyach ha'er makiv the mitzvahs hanal beis dvarim. From what we've learned, we can derive, we can understand that the power of the makiv, the transcendent energy that a mitzvah, the levush of the mitzvah introduces, has two things, beis dvarim. That the power of the makiv mitzvah has two things. Ha'echad, ha'alaf, hu b'mashanim shecha'er ad lamata mata, that it draws down the elikus dafke, shezeu yiridas makiv lahoyer. Let me just make this size right so I can read it properly. Here we are. So the first thing the mitzvah helps do is bring down the Eir, the divine energy. Now Shema Yisrael is all about the divine unity. And when the neshama contemplates, says it and contemplates on it, it also has an effect on the animal soul. But a mitzvah, as we learned before, ratifies, affirms, confirms, and also brings it down into a way that's very substantial. Like we spoke about a mitzvah gashmi. Like he said, Tefillin Shabbat, you have the klav gashmi, you have the physical parchment. So it's more than just contemplating and saying the words. Like he said, it actually gives it a tangible, concrete reality. So he's going to explain what that means. Shetaskil. So it affects the darkness, which is the animal soul, because the animal soul, as we learned, on its own, is only cognizant and aware of its own needs. It only is after the training and inspiration of the divine soul that the animal soul begins to be receptive to another way of looking at things, a divine perspective. So it's called Cheshach Nefesh Habamis, Shetaskil v'tispol gam hi b'yichud Elah the Krishma, or b'yichud Elyon the Krishma canal. To affect it that it too should understand and be stimulated, not just intellectually, but also tispol, which is emotionally stimulated in the yichud Elyon of Shema canal. And that the Kedusha should be transmitted also in physical matters of Maisa Mitzvos. Because remember, the Nefesh Habamis on its own is a materialistic entity. It's interested in its own materialistic survival, its existential needs. So as much as the Neshama, which is a spiritual entity, and its words and contemplation in Hashem Echad affect it, we still have to contend with the physicality or the materialistic urges and longings of the animal soul. Mitzvahs, on the other hand, are Maisa mitzvahs. It's not just words and contemplation. And it's not just emotions. It's not just Vahafta. It has a Maisa connected to it, as we learned earlier. Va'ikir, that's one thing. And the second point that mitzvahs add is, if you remember, is the ratification, the confirmation, and the resonating element. Va'ikir, and the primary thing that the mitzvahs introduce is Masha Yochel Iskayim Kiyim Nitzchi Kol Hayom. So one thing the mitzvahs do is bring it down into a very tangible, concrete, material way. That's what a mitzvah does. When you put on talus and film, you're putting on physical objects. It's not just contemplating about talus and film. You're actually wrapping yourself around. And that has a deeper effect on the guf and nefesh habamis than just the words and the contemplation and the emotions and the avos Hashem. And the ikir is that it allows it to be miskayim b'kiyum nitzchi, that it should be sustained in eternal permanence, kol hayom, all day, and it shouldn't dissipate, as we discussed earlier. Av b'yosei tored b'havli elam hazeh. Even when he's busy with the nonsense, with the pettiness, with the trivialities, havli elam hazeh had many meanings. Hevel can mean folly, it could mean hollowness, it could mean emptiness, vanity even. So havli elam hazeh, that even when he's busy with the affairs of the world, worldly affairs, after davening, during davening, he's occupied and consumed with davening. Therefore, he's thinking about Hashem Echad. But afterwards, even when he's busy with havli elam hazeh, lo yosug acher libe, he will not retreat. Yosug acher would mean that after the davening ends, he could retreat back, that all the inspiration that was there dissipates. But that his heart will return to its initial interests, which are materialistic interests. The mitzvahs counter that. They give it a permanence. And he continues to desire in the mitzvahs of Hashem, and do so with accountability, with the kabbalah sel machal shamayim, with the yoke of heaven, with love and reverence, b'li hefsek le'elam, without any cessation, without ever pausing. So the mitzvahs give it that power of permanence. Va'afal pi, and now he qualifies based on what it says in Tanya, sha'ava lekisha b'krishma, that the divine love in Shema, cholfa va'avra, that, yes indeed, by davening, the whole passionate love of V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha is alive and well, and after Shema, it does dissipate. Nevertheless, miskayemis lamaisa, but still its effect in action remains. In other words, even though you may not have the same passion after davening like during davening, but the effect, because the mitzvahs gave it a certain physical reality and a tangible, concrete application, so the lamaisa, it continues to have the effect on the person, and that does not dissipate. Makif, the talus and film, shekedim krishma kanal, and that's only due because you actually put on talus and film and didn't just say the words and didn't just contemplate on them, or even get stimulated emotionally, because that passes, that weakens or dissipates. But the action part has a permanent effect in Maisa al Koponim, even though you're not going to have the same passion like during davening. Now, he doesn't really elaborate here about it. In Tanya, he does speak about this more, especially later in chapter 16, where he talks about where a person may not reach the level of a full passion of love. Nevertheless, it can affect him in a way that he realizes that it's worthy, because that effect, since it had a tangible, concrete impact on him, that effect is lasting that at least he feels the worthiness, that it manifests at least in action, even if he doesn't feel the full passion of the love. So just to give an example, if somebody comes to you and asks you to volunteer, we need your help to come, let's say, help needy children, or to pack food packages for the poor. And you say, I don't really have time to do so, but I'll give you money, and I'll give you my support. I'll give you kind words and encouragement, and so on and so forth. So yes, that does help to some extent. But if you actually participate and you actually do the action and you go and meet the children, or you pack the food packages, I'm just giving you examples. In other words, it's not just your, and I don't just mean lip service. In other words, you're not just speaking about it. You're not even just thinking and feeling for the cause, but you actually in action get involved in it. There's no question it's going to have a bigger impact, not just on the recipients, but also on you, because you actually spend time in action. Because we live in Olam HaMaisa, and that's what mitzvahs do. So as important as davening is, and saying Shema, and contemplating Hamayrik Be'echad, and extending the contemplation, and all the details we learned about Yechud Tatan, Yechud Ilah, and the two Yechudim, and the fusion of both unifications. At the end of the day, because we live in a physical world, and the Guf and Nefesh Abamis are occupied with the physical world, Maisa HaMitzvahs adds a dimension that turns it into something that is Maisa, not just Machshava and Dibur, and not just Seichel and Midas. It comes down into action. And that has, number one, it brings it down into action.
Which page are you?
Lamata Mata 11, page 11. And the second thing, that it gives it a permanence, because you brought it into reality, into action. And that's a fact. The fact of the matter is, like they say in the world of fundraising, it's not your heart, it's not that the money follows the heart, your investment follows your heart, it's your heart follows your investment. When you do something in action, you become more committed to it. That's the way of the world. So in that sense, that's what Maisa Mitzvahs are adding here. So even though the passion and the emotion of the tefillah may pass, but the action has that permanent effect. And v'zehu, the Mitteler Rebbe continues, v'zehu mitam, and the reason for this is, the cause for this is, mitam sheyesh be'er makif, for the reason that the er makif, ha'elyon, has within it, mebchinas rav chesed yamin ha'elyon, because the er makif, which is like an embrace, what we learned in Torah, the embrace of Yamini Techapkeni, with my right arm, with your right arm Techapkeni, you embrace me. It is mamshich from Rav Chesed, from an abundant Chesed, Rav Chesed, not just Chesed, but a Makif Dika Chesed, coming from higher than Ishtalshlus, the Yamin Elyon, from the right side of above, from Chesed above, B'bchinis Yamin Mekareves, Yamin Mekareves with the right, you bring close, you embrace with the right. That's what Rav Chesed is. When the Chesed is flowing from Makif, it doesn't have any limitations. When you have a Chesed coming from Chesed of Atzilus, so it has parameters. How much you're bestowing, how much you're extending, how much your benevolence is helping another, is showing Chesed. When it comes from Rav Chesed of Makif, Makif does not have any limitations, because it's not bound by containers like Oris and Kalim that the Pnimi does. So Rav Chesed, therefore, goes down lower and lower, the first point. The point that it goes Lamata Mata, and of course, the second point is that it creates a permanence, but we'll get to that in a minute. Meanwhile, Lamata Mata Ad Mo'ed. So Lamata Mata, the Ad Mo'ed, very extensively, down below, really goes down, penetrates down below. V'hainu k'moshe kosav v'yamine techapkeni. That his right arm techapkeni, he embraced me. Chibuk is an embrace, a hug. U'k'moshe ha'av mechabek lebnoi oy le'oyev nefesh. Like a father who embraces or hugs his son, or le'oyev nefesh, or another beloved of his, oyev nefesh. Kenafshe. like his area of nefesh, like he's loved himself. The connection is so deep that you're loving the son or the area of nefesh kenafshe like his own soul. Ma'acherev, and how does he embrace? Ma'acherev biyad yamine. When you embrace someone, you don't just embrace a part of them. You wrap them around like a talus. You wrap around your arms, or in this case, with your right arm, you wrap around the person and you embrace them in a full embrace. Next page, 12. Dafke. Shechibuk zeh ma'acherev. And this chibuk is not just the front of the person. You're not just holding their chest, for example. You're putting your arm around their back. So this chibuk, this hug from their back, Meira, indicates shemachapke mekarev elov biyamin zeh lebilti yachol losug ocher mimenu le'elam. So when you embrace someone, it's a full connection that's causing the person to not be able to retreat. If you shake someone's hand, for example, or even give them a kiss, you're not holding on to all of them. But when you embrace somebody, they can't escape. And that's not the right word to use, actually, because we're not looking to escape. But the embrace essentially draws them into your hemisphere, so to speak. That he cannot retreat at all forever. And that love will be sustained and remain with him without ever dissipating or ever leaving, even when they separate. So even though physically, obviously, once you stop the embrace, the hug, you could say you're not hugging them anymore. But Baruchnius, when the Chesed Elyon embraces us, that embrace, which is more than just a touch, fully encompasses us, fully surrounds us, that creates a permanent effect on the person that even when they separate, their love continues to flow from the one who embraced you to the one that is being embraced. In this case, like the father who's hugging his son or his beloved, and as such, hugs them in a way that completely embraces them, and that has a permanent effect even when they separate. And that's the idea of a chibuk. Because you're not just, as I said, embracing a part of him, you're embracing all of him. So you're completely surrounding him, even his backside, which you would think the backside is not the premise of the person. The premise of the person is the front side, face to face. But here, it's embracing him completely. That's the mashal. The kachul amayla, and like it is in the mashal, so too it is above, the nimshal and the moral. B'chinas chibuk di yamina elyon, with the chibuk of yamina elyon, the embrace from the supernal right side of chesed, shu b'chinas ava rabba halyena, that's the great love from above. Shenimshechet b'chinas makif ala odam, like a chibuk, like a hug, a embrace, that is drawn in a form of makif on the person, gam b'nefesh habamis. Because the nefesh habamis is like the acharayim. The nefesh halakis is the premise, the face to face. But we learned in Tanya, he speaks about the nefesh habamis, chitzenim, acharayim, it's the outer side. And even that is being embraced. Shaloi, ukamaisa agashmis, b'mitzvah she'iskayim bli yenata, v'yoseg ocher libei la'elam. So here too, so number one, it embraces and that's what the Maisa Gashmis b'mitzvahs does, because mitzvahs are the yamin of Chesed Elyon that embraces the person, and to the point, just like in the mashal, that the embrace lasts afterwards, that doesn't allow the person to retreat. Here too, this embrace through my mitzvahs ha'maises cause him not to retreat. Achar libei la'elam av b'yesei torah b'acharayim b'chitzenius degufei chulu. Even when he's busy, like he said before, Havli Elam Hazeh, even when he's busy with the Achadayim and the Chitzenius, with the outer and the more external means of material activity that a human being is involved in, whether it's work, or it's a meal, or the physical matters and affairs of this world, even when he's in the Achadayim, the Chitzenius, the Gufi, the outer dimension of his body, that too has been embraced, and therefore the embrace affects that even afterwards, that a person should not retreat. So that's what the mitzvahs do. they add that concrete, tangible permanence. Because where do we get this air makif from? We know, we still learn that comes from the mitzvahs. It doesn't come from nowhere. When you do a mitzvah is mamshech ratzon elyon, which is the makif of keser, like the Alter Rebbe explained in Torah in this Maimer, and the Mitteler Rebbe elaborated. So it's the mitzvahs that are the nasim min mitzvahs atzmon shalamaylo. That's the level That's the inner dimension of the Ratzon Elyon of the divine will, which is a Makif. But the inner Ratzon, because the inner Ratzon is what a mitzvah is. The outer Ratzon is connected to Acharayim. So, example, if you need to eat, your eating is a means in order to get energy to be able to do a mitzvah. But the mitzvah itself is the Primus Ratzon Elyon. And Shazeu Kamoya Amud Shemagia V'Nots Tchilosim B'Seifon. And that's like a pillar that reaches from high, from Ratzon Elyon that goes just drawn downward. And the beginning is wedged in the end, M'mayla Lamata, from the top down. That's what a mitzvah does. V'hu b'chinas Keser, that's the level of Keser, Ratzon, Tarach Amude Er, the 620 pillars of light, which is what the corresponding mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs, plus the 7 mitzvahs of the Rabbanon, is 620, which is drawn down through the mitzvahs. So the mitzvahs are drawing down Keser, Makif, from the previous Ratzon Elyon, Ukishmoshe Kosov, Kitsino Ratzon Tatrenu, that your Ratzon wraps us around. Kitsino, like a, what's Sino? We learned this earlier. I forgot what Sino is. What's Sino? Sino is like a blanket? Not sure. Kitsino Ratzon Tatrenu, Ulekach Nemar, and that's why it says, Shemer mitzvah leyoda dovara, a person who keeps a mitzvah will not know of any evil thing. Af b'chiluche b'mokim tuma. Even when he walks in an impure place, in a toxic environment, he will not be affected by it because the Ratzon wraps him around and protects him from all negative things. And this concludes the next point, which is elaborated upon by the Mitteler Rebbe on page Omid Shin Sadik Hey, Shin Sadik Vov, page 395 and 396. That's point number 5. The first effect of the Makif of mitzvahs, Lamata Mata, it reaches all the way down in Maisa, to the Sefer, and all the way to the end, the lowest level of Elam Haza, Maisa, and that it adds a permanence, that adds the permanence of the hug, of the Makif, that affects the person even after davening and doesn't dissipate.
Dina is translated as a shield.
Shield. Okay, a shield. Yeah, that's good. It's a shield, right?
Could
like
you hear me?
Okay.
Could you
I'll
hear
stop
me?
here for any questions now, if anybody wants to ask anything.
That means he said that even bihiyoisoi told ba'choirayim bechitzeni is the gufoi, even then is loy yisoig ocher riboy le'olam. Correct?
You just read it yourself. What are you asking me? You just read the words from the Mitteler Rebbe. So of course it's correct.
That is, even if you don't have the feeling, but it's like the brace, the biyad yamin.
That's exactly what he says, yeah.
He said a very strong expression, af behiyoisoi behiluchoi b'mokim tumo.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Now, of course, you could ask the klutz kasha, so then why do we see that people who put on talis and tefillin and daven properly, it does dissipate and it doesn't last? So I'll let any of you try to speculate what the answer to that question
Because the pira is not taken away. You're getting the koyach, but you have to do it, even after davening.
Yeah.
Maybe those people, if they didn't wear talis and tefillin, it would be worse.
That's always correct. Yeah, that's true too.
But even if you wear talis and tefillin, if you find things to go by itself, it's not protecting you. The mitzvahs are helping you to be able to bystand the difficulties, but it's not taking away the bechira from you.
That's correct too. Yeah, it's all correct. Everything you're saying.
Do you have more to add, Rabbi Jacobson?
No. I'm taking questions if anybody wants to ask anything or comment. Are there any other questions?
I was just going to ask, so what happens to that energy if you don't put on the tefillin, but you're still saying Krishma, like it just dissipates? Is that what happens?
It's like anything in life. You know, you could still have some impact, but it's not a complete impact. And it's going to be more difficult. Bottom line, it's like any type of battle. You want to be fully armed with all the artillery and your full arsenal.
Mm-hmm.
In working, just be practical. Look, we live in a dark world. There are many temptations and many challenges. And the goal here, of course, is through Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, the neshama, the flame of the soul, the contemplation, the love, and now the mitzvahs are all meant to arm us with all many resources as possible to tackle the battles and confrontations and challenges of our lives. So the more you can more you can draw these resources into your life, the more effective it will be. But like Reb Shlomo says, it's correct, we have free will. And the fact of the matter is, nothing is magic and automatic. You know, a person can easily get involved in business matters and they won't have the effect, but that's not because they didn't have the potential. If they allow the mitzvahs to continue to impact them and the tefillah, it will have that effect, but you have to be cognizant and aware. And that's, but the mitzvahs nevertheless add a tremendous element to it all.
Is that why, can it be retroactive? I mean, is that why it's so important for somebody to put on tefillin at least once in their life? Will it, or no?
Here he's talking about putting on tefillin before davening.
Okay.
And talis and tefillin. Every mitzvah has an effect on a person.
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank you.
We're talking about just very, very practical. We live in a material world where most of our interests are self-interest oriented. Most of our self-absorbed with our own needs. We're talking here, the Torah comes to teach a person self-mastery and self-discipline to be able to focus on more transcendent elements of the purpose of your life, not just pleasure and your own needs. And everything is a resource toward that direction. Here he's discussing specifically prayer, tefillah, shema, and as well as mitzvahs, and we're going to soon talk about Torah. So these are all the ways that a human being, these are the disciplines and the tools that each person is made available to us to be able to be a more spiritual, a more refined, and a more transcendent person. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, thank you.
What about women?
So yesterday we had a whole conversation about that. That's a question that's not on this mimer. That's a question in general. Women are potter for mitzvah sesher shazman groma. So how they connect to God then? So that question is regardless of this mimer. So yesterday I discussed it. It all complements each other. Women have their unique mitzvahs, just like Kohan and a king, a melech has his unique mitzvahs. And just like we have mitzvahs on Pesach and on Shavuos and on Sukkot, and you don't have those mitzvahs all year round. So mitzvahs each of them cover a different part of life and different aspects. Like tefillin, Shabbos we don't put on film. Why don't you ask the question? What about Shabbos? How do we get this level on Shabbos when we don't put on tefillin? The answer is Shabbos itself is the ois that is mamshich these levels. Anyway, I discussed it more yesterday in detail. Okay. Unless there are more questions, I'm going to move to number 6, point number 6 on page 12. So he said there's two things that the koyach hamakif of mitzvahs accomplish. One he just described, that it brings it down lamata mata ad moed, all the way down below into action, and therefore gives it a permanence, as we discussed. Now comes the next. Based on b'koyach mitzvah, halah too, halah sanefesh alikis lamayla misharsha. That's the effect on the animal soul and on the body. But we also learned earlier, if you may recall, that the neshama is also elevated. In other words, the effect of talis and tefillah is not just for the animal soul, it's also for the divine soul. So even though Ner Hashem Nishma Sodam, the divine soul is divine, and it itself by nature seeks God, not like the animal soul, that doesn't naturally see God. That divine soul does see God, and yet mitzvahs elevate the neshama as well, as we learned earlier, that it elevates it to the kedusha. If you remember point number 2. Your point number 2, back on page 9, it talked about how it elevates the neshama to kedusha elyona, or kedusha atzmis, as he called it, which is asher kedushanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu. So in addition to what a neshama is on its own, we say in the blessing, Asher baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech asher kedushanu, who has sanctified us, b'mitzvos, with his mitzvahs, v'tzivanu, and commanded us to do so and so. So you see from that the mitzvahs add to the neshama too. And now he's going to elaborate a bit more on that. So this goes together with point number 2 before, about Gedusha Atzmis. If you remember the levels of Gedusha Nishtalshlus and level of Gedusha Atzmis. So now let's go to point number 6. So he says like this, Va'in HaBeis. Again, language of the Mitteler Rebbe here. All this is not my language, this is citing word for word the Mitteler Rebbe's words. Va'in HaBeis sheyesh b'Makif zeh, the mitzvahs. And the second element that the Makif mitzvahs contain, hu b'chinas halah the erchezer momata lamayla. So interestingly, when it came to Nefesh Habamis and the Guf, he said it was Amshachim Amayla Lamata. Because the mitzvahs is Ratzon Elyon, that's going downward, all the way down Lamata Mata, to embrace the body, and even the Acharayim and the Chitzenius, and elevate it all. Now he's saying that here it's an elevation of the Erchezer Lamata Lamayla. The mitzvahs come, and they elevate the neshama to a higher level. V'zeu ma sheyesh b'koyach cher makif. And what does this consist of, the second effect of the makif of mitzvahs? And that is the power of the transcendent energy of mitzvahs, the mitzvahs, la'hales u'lareim mesanefesh alekis, to elevate and to exalt the divine soul, amayla misharsha, higher than its root. Higher than its root. Because like we learned, the root, he's going to, I think, explain this more in detail. The root is Chachma Vatzilus, as an neshama, as an entity called a neshama. We're not talking about the neshama in Atzmos. There it's not even an entity. It's rooted there. But here we're talking about the neshama as it manifests in Seder Shtalsus and comes down below. So it elevates it Lamayla Misharsha. Ulhalesa ima. Gamasech lamidas the nefesh habamis. And he adds in the parentheses that this elevation of the divine soul also includes elevating with it, the elevation includes also the mind and the emotions of the animal soul. Because the neshama, we learned earlier, even of Moshe Rabbeinu and Avram Avinu, if you remember, he said, they're all rooted in Kodesh Elyon. Taka high levels, Chachma Vatzilus, and very deep levels. He called Pnimius Abba and so on. And here the mitzvah, however, elevates also higher than Chochmah, which is called Kodesh, to reach Kedusha Atzmis Mamish. Kedusha Atzmis means the actual Ratzon Elyon, the will of God. Shezeu shenikra Adam. Let me read this. Shezeu shenikra Adam Adam Elyon Mamish. And that's why we call the person Adam, from the word Adama. The word Adam has many meanings. It comes from Adama, the dust of the earth, but Adam also comes from the word Doime, Adama Elyon Mamish. That is very similar. It's in the image and the likeness of Hashem above. Elyon Mamish Canal. Now, what this parenthesis exactly means needs to be somewhat analyzed, because the neshama is Adam Elyon even without mitzvahs. Adam was created b'tzelem Elokim. That's why it's called a neshama. It's a divine soul. So here it seems like he's saying that to be a Adam Elyon Mamish, I'm assuming he means to say that with mitzvahs it reveals that element. So the neshama is indeed created in the divine image, but that's still in the shape and form of Chachma Vatzilus. And B'Kedushan B'Mitzvah B'Kedush Elyon Mamish, that's the Mamish, Adam Elyon Mamish. It sounds like the emphasis here is on the word Mamish. Not just Adam Elyon, that he's similar to above, but he actually becomes like one. And that's what the mitzvahs do. So even though a neshama, like, let's put it this way. Let's use an example. I think I gave this example before. In Tanya, he says, in chapter 2, where he talks about Chelik Elekam Emal Mamish, she said, Vayipol ba'apav nishmas chayim. That God imbued and breathed the soul of the human being from from his inner dimension, as he says there, like a child is not just like a student of a teacher, that the teacher conveys an idea to the student, but the student is not made of the DNA of the teacher. Whereas a ben comes ma'atzmus moyach, a child is from the very essence and the very genetic matter of the father. Same thing lamaila. The neshama comes from chachmei law, which is hu v'chachmase echad. That's what he says in Tanya. So then you could ask the question: so why do you need mitzvahs for? If a neshama is elikus, that's it. Because the neshama, the elikus is concealed in it. The neshama comes down below, and neshama shenesata bi tahirihi ata barasa ata yitzarta ata nefachta bi nefachta. By yipach is nefachta. That's already as the neshama is down below. So yes, it's like a child is made up of the very DNA of the father. But is that enough? No, the child now has to live by the guidelines that the father wants it to live by. Even God forbid, even a child that's wicked and cruel and a criminal still has the DNA of their father. But you cannot say that they're living up to it. You can say, in essence, the etzem and neshama is there. But they could also be, God forbid, a criminal and destructive. They may even need to be imprisoned for that matter. So you say it's not been revealed. What do mitzvahs do? Mitzvahs align the neshama, not just that mitzvahs don't create the soul. The soul is a part of godliness. It's chelik elikam emal mamish, but it makes sure that chelik elikam mamish, as it manifests in a body and an animal soul, should be aligned in its behavior with what the Father wants, and that's through Torah mitzvahs. When the neshama gives tzedakah, the neshama beguf, I should say. When a soul and a body gives charity, you're compassionate, and you are following what God wants you to do, then you're aligning the neshama as it comes down into the body with what the real nature of a neshama is. Like the Rambam says in Hilchos Gerushin, in the end of chapter 2. So he brings there the laws about compelling someone to give a get. If they don't want to give a get, the Bezdin has the power to compel them to give a divorce. But it says a divorce, a get can be forced. It can be a get mu'usa. Then it's not halachically acceptable if you force someone. Says the Rambam, these words. He mamish says these words. It's a very chassidish Rambam. He says, it's not forced, you know why? Because every Jew really wants to do Torah mitzvahs and doesn't want to do sins. What's being mu'usa, what's forced is the yitzrei hu she'ansei. It's the Yetzer Hara that's forcing him to go away from his natural inclination to do what God wants and to follow his own selfish desires. So when you force him to give a get, you're actually revealing his true will. Because the Yetzer Hara is the one that has taken him into captivity. It's not the mitzvahs, because the mitzvahs come naturally to a neshama. But you see from that you can have a neshama, beguf, but you don't necessarily follow God's will. Comes a mitzvah and says, here is what God wants of you. You want to live up to being the true son that is made up of the very genetic matter of the DNA of Elikus. These are the mitzvahs you have to do. So the mitzvahs are what align the neshama, and that's what he says here. So even though Adam Elyon, we're all born in the image and likeness of Hashem, B'Tselem Talmeinu Kidmusenu, B'Tselem Udmuz, B'Tselem Elikim, Chelik Elikam Emal Mamish, Vayipal Ba'apav Nishmas Chaim, all the different expressions, but it's the mitzvahs that bring it alive and fan, you can say, the pilot flame of the Etzem HaNeshama and bring it out in an expressive way. So when someone says, I'm a good Jew at heart, I'm really a good person, but their behavior is obnoxious, or their behavior doesn't reflect goodness, so you say, yes, be'etzem, you're that way. But as the Alter Rebbe told one of his chassidim, who had a great mind, but he was lazy, and he wasn't studying. So the Alter Rebbe said to him, you could be such a great Talmud Chacham. Why don't you study? So he said, Rebbe, you know that if I wanted to, I can be a Lamdan. So the Alter Rebbe said, just like a Ganef is not someone who could be a Ganef. A thief is not someone who's capable of being a thief, but someone who's an actual thief. The same thing with a Lamdan. A Lamdan is not someone who could be a Lamdan, it's someone that is a Lamdan. So the fact that we have potential doesn't necessarily define what we are. It just says you have the potential, now you have to actualize it. Like we're talking about here, bring it Maisa into action, lamata mata. And that also brings it into a permanent state. So bottom line is that's what mitzvahs do. And therefore, even a neshama is also affected by the mitzvahs because the neshama can be concealed. The nefesh habamis, we already learned, is affected. You are training and transforming the nefesh habamis. The nefesh halakis does not have to be transformed. It's a divine entity, but it could be a divine entity that's limited. And it's the mitzvahs asher kedeshanu b'mitzvesov that elevate it to the kedusha atzmis, which is calling here kedusha elyon mamish.
Can you take the question?
Let me just see where I'm going to stop, and then we'll take questions. 1 second. Hold on. I think I'm going to stop here because the next piece he's going to go back to the muscle of the embrace, but he wants to now explain how the embrace affects the divine soul. Before he explained how you embrace someone, also their back, how it elevates and affects the animal soul. But he's now going to go back to explaining how it affects the divine soul. Let me just see something. What's up? Yeah, I'm going to stop here because it's a whole topic that I want to read the full thing, not just remain hanging in the middle. So bottom line is, he's talking about point number 2 in what is the Makif of mitzvahs. Number 1 was the effect on the animal soul, the mata in a permanent way. And now he's talking about the effect of elevating the divine soul to higher than its so-called defined kedusha, to kedusha atzmis, asher kedusha mitzvos v'tzivanu, by the neshama living up, by the neshama behaving and acting by following the mitzvahs, whatever mitzvah it is. I mean, here the mitzvahs are talk about all the mitzvahs, but they also include, of course, talis and tefillin, which he's not mentioning specifically because it's not necessarily the point. Here he wants to say mitzvahs in general have that effect on the neshama. So that's the elevation of the neshama. So I'll stop here. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, my question is, I guess, a little bit of, how shall I say, delving into the distinction between, let's say, a Musar approach to mitzvahs versus a Hasidic approach to the observance of mitzvahs. It seems to me, and this is one of the things that attracted me to Hasidus Chabad, that the performance of mitzvahs can be very robotic. It can be very just rule oriented. It doesn't. Obviously, ideally, there should be a kavana associated with it. And that's kind of the ruchniest element of, in my opinion, of the mitzvahs. But there I don't. You cannot overgeneralize, but I was Makaroved in a Litvisher way, and I observed. And again, I will not overgeneralize. There are many, perhaps the majority of Litvisher, modern Orthodox or to the right Litvisher Yidden, who are just the most beautiful people. But there are also beautiful people that are not mitzvah observant. So that doesn't alone mean the mitzvahs are making them a beautiful person. But on the other hand, I also observed a lot of people who were very, very, very good at being medactic about observing mitzvahs to the letter, very carefully, but it didn't seem to make them, very nice people or very, I didn't see a whole lot of godliness and divine nature in what they were doing. So I know we talked about, well, just think how bad they would have been if they weren't doing mitzvahs. That's fine. But the point is, if mitzvahs are supposed to, actualize and help realize the nefesh elokis, it seems like there's more to it than just the mere performance. There's
what are you asking?
Kavana. Well, I don't know. I mean, what am I asking? I'm asking. It seems like just performing the mitzvahs ipso facto doesn't necessarily draw out the nefesh elokis, at least in a manifest way. Maybe between the person and God, I don't know, but I don't know. It seems like there's got to be a kavana.
That's what it should be doing. The fact that people do mechanical mitzvahs, he's not talking about that. He's talking about what a mitzvah should do. A mitzvah is aligning a soul with God's will. That's basic. That just by reading Chumash, it says that. You sanctified us with your mitzvahs. It's bringing out that the sanctity of the mitzvahs is sanctifying us. All the psukim, especially in Vayikra, in this sefer, previous sefer, all talk about how mitzvahs imbue and permeate and transform a person to the kedusha of Hashem. Kedoshim tiyu, be sanctified because I am holy. All the mitzvahs, mamleches kainim v'goy kodesh, v'skadashtem v'yisav kedoshim. The Torah is filled with references that through mitzvahs we become sanctified because God is giving us His personal will and saying, when you do this, you become transformed, you become refined.
I think what I'm saying is
but my question is, number one, I don't know how it has anything to do with what we're learning in Ayin Beis. You're asking a general question about mitzvahs. So before we continue, does anyone have any questions on what we actually learned here now? I just want to pose that
but
so I can.
I am asking about what we just learned.
What's the question? What's the question?
Isn't there
about what you said? About what you said, it's like Reb Simon said before, the mitzvahs are not taking away the choice from you. You could be a very religious person and do the mitzvahs, but you are not allowing the mitzvahs to help you. Your own selfishness, your own personality is being expressed. So then the mitzvahs are not going to take it away from you. The mitzvahs are only going to help you if you want to get better. Because Hashem is not taking it. The Mashiach will come, then you won't have a choice. Now you have a choice.
Right, I completely agree. I think that's the essence of my question is the kavana of doing a mitzvah seems to be, in my opinion, just as important, if not more important, than practically performing the mitzvah itself. It doesn't have its transformative.
So what is the question? Can you just frame a question?
Why doesn't the Mitteler Rebbe talk about kavana? Why does he just say is it
because that's not, because in other Maimarim he talks about kavana. It's not the mission. It's not the theme of this Maimer.
Yeah, maybe it's assumed, I guess, is the answer.
No, he can't talk about everything everywhere. Here his focus is on the effect of mitzvahs, first on the animal soul, and then on the divine soul. And that's, the kavana, what do you mean? He kept on saying kavana of Re'usa Deliba, the kavana of Shema. He's talking about the kavana, that intention that we have when we say Shema. Now we're talking about the mitzvahs that are adding to that.
I guess it's implied, is the short answer.
No, but to Yitzchak's point, Rabbi Jacobson, he's what I think what I'm understanding he's saying is, if an observant person is observing mitzvahs, of course, Beruchnias, nobody who does the mitzvah, they're going to get the credit. But if the mitzvahs are transformative, which they are obviously, right? But the person who's observant, how much more so they should be able to, be expressive and be able to feel that and be able to like make that part of their lives. But obviously, that's not the case for not everybody. But we do know some people that are very observant. They seem like they have kavanah, they do all these things, but ultimately it has not internalized within them. You know what I'm saying? So I understand where Yitzchak is coming from.
Well, what as you're saying is that there are people, like the Ramban says, there's a novel Bereshus Sater. There are people who are obnoxious, frum people, and even use Torah in obnoxious ways. Is that what you're asking? Are there people?
Well, the point is that if the mitzvah is supposed to transform you,
because there's no, like Reb Shlomo said, there's no magic.
Yeah,
you could use a mitzvah in a very corrupt and abusive way too.
Yeah. Okay.
There's no automatic anything. It all comes down to a person's behavior. Anyway, that people can abuse Yiddishkeit, of course. I just last week did a class called Religious Hypocrisy about religion being completely distorted or abused or misused and destructive, actually.
That was your master class in Wednesday, or when was it?
Last Wednesday, yeah.
Okay. Glad you mentioned
That's
it.
a whole other discussion. That's not. That's like,
I don't. I mean, with respect, I don't think it's a whole other discussion. I think this
for me
is right.
It's completely. I wouldn't even bring it into this. It's a fine discussion, like always. It's a good discussion. But I don't see the relevance to what we're learning here. You can explain to me what the relevance, please. I'm not sure.
I tried, but it's okay. We've kind of hashed it out. And I appreciate everyone's comments. And thank you, Rabbi Teifel. That was what you said, I think, was the most on point. Even though you have the mitzvahs give you the potential to transform and the potential to connect with the Eibishter, but you still have free will for that not to happen. You can perform the mitzvah, but if your heart's not in it, it's not going to have the at least not the greatest impact it could have. It maybe has a little impact, but if your free will, if you're still all about yourself, you can perform mitzvahs left and right all day long. But if you're still about yourself, it's not going to have that full transformative effect. That's what I take out of this.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, so we'll stop here. Page 12 in the summary, middle of point 6. We'll stop here. Let me stop the recording.